Our first contact with Laura was in 2004, not with herself, but with one of her texts, a text that denied the relationship between memory and archive. It actually stated that I'm going to summarize this, was the catalyzer of memory, but that back then in 2004, when memory and archive were dealt with a lot, these both terms were being mixed up. There's another text, one of her first texts that allowed us to know her, was the principle of belonging, and she talked about the principles of belonging in museums and archaeology, and the stratification of what people from the Picasso Museum will talk about later, the stratification marked by archaeology and the principle of origin or belonging. So I'm going to read a short paragraph of hers, which summarizes what she will be talking about. Technologies are disruptive and they change the way societies document their actions, transactions, and communications, and change who participate in those processes. There's a deep reflection on the role of archivists in this world of technologies so that it doesn't disappear. So with this, we will now hear from Laura Millar. I will be sitting down to watch her just like you. She will be connecting from Vancouver online for the questions, and she'll be able to answer the questions we ask her. She will be getting up really early for today's session. Thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me to speak to you today. I'm delighted to join the symposium, though I'm sorry the geographical distance between Western Canada and beautiful Spain means I must deliver my presentation remotely. I look forward to joining you live later, but to address the challenge of time zones, I have pre-recorded my formal talk. I'll be turning off the camera until the end of the presentation to make it easier to transmit the recording to you in Spain. In 1923, Pablo Picasso said, "We all know that art is not truth. Art is a lie that makes us realize truth." As I have argued in my book, A Matter of Facts, The Value of Evidence in an Information Age, facts, evidence, and truth are not the same. A personal truth, religion or politics perhaps, does not depend on facts or evidence, but some forms of truth, scientific, forensic, judicial, legal, depend on facts, on statements that can be proven true. More specifically, those forms of truth depend not just on facts, but on evidence, on demonstrable proof of facts. Without access to authentic sources of proof, societies cannot agree on facts, and so they cannot agree on a point of truth. A painting by Picasso is a work of artifice, a deception in oil or pastel that presents a lie to lead us to more universal truths. A visitor to the Picasso Museum may or may not believe that this painting by Picasso is beautiful. That is the visitor's own personal truth. But the authenticity of the painting as a work by Picasso depends on facts and proof. This authenticity is confirmed in different ways: an analysis of the brushwork, an examination of the canvas, an investigation of records that link the work to Picasso. To answer these questions of authenticity, we need access to evidence, often in the form of records and archives. We are looking not for artifice, but for proof. Letters, photographs, exhibit catalogs, they help us authenticate the work as Picasso's. For millennia, archivists have been responsible for capturing, preserving, and making available such sources of proof. To do this, we have traditionally followed a hierarchical and linear workflow, focusing on collection and custodianship. Creation came first, and creation was usually outside of our control. Our job began with the acquisition of archives, after which we focused on preservation, then access. We do a good job. We are experts. And in saying this, I particularly compliment the National Art Museum of Catalonia, whose image I use here. Your facility looks beautiful, and I am sorry not to see it in person. Conventionally, though, we can agree that the work of archives has focused on old materials. We might wait, sometimes for decades or centuries, for the creator of a body of records to live their lives and do their work before we played our part as the keepers of the record. But our job is changing, whether we like it or not. As digital technologies transform this traditional archival role, the archivist is being pulled away from the care of static, old documentary sources. Today, more of us are, and should be, involved in capturing and recording evidence of the present. In my work as a consultant, I rarely touch a historical photograph. I spend my time advising governments and organizations on how to manage electronic records. I establish digital preservation protocols, write policies for electronic records management, and lobby governments and senior managers for increased funding for current records care. I may sell my services as a records manager or information analyst, but at heart I am an archivist. I care deeply that societies have access to sources of proof and truth, and I devote my energies to the preservation of evidence. To do this, I insert myself in the record-making and archive-keeping process, regardless of whether the material in question is new or old. As a consultant for over 40 years, I have seen archival work change. Today I want to share some thoughts about the nature of that change, and I want to offer some suggestions about how archivists, the professionals tasked with helping to make and keep authentic sources of evidence, can and should approach our work in a digital age. Digital technologies are disruptive. They change how societies carry out and then document their actions and transactions and communications, and they change who participates in those processes. The role of the archivist as neutral custodian, as the caretaker of old, static historical archives, and as the protector of a whole, closed, or finished archive, has been fundamentally disrupted by technology. Many have argued, and I agree, that the archivist was never neutral, that we always bring our perspectives to our work, but I worry less about our biases than I do about whether, in a digital world, we will have anything to work with in the first place. Archival work should not be defined by the materials in our care. We are not archivists because we manage old paper documents, physical files, or black and white photographs. We are archivists because we facilitate the capture and protection of authentic sources of documentary proof, whatever their form, and then facilitate access to those sources as external, verifiable proof. We help societies remember themselves, good, bad, and ugly. We help thwart lies and mistruth and disinformation by saying, no, look, here is an authentic source of proof that validates or refutes or explains. Archival methodologies will always change as the material in our care changes. If an organization creates paper records, we need to manage paper records. If a government creates tweets and social media posts, we need to manage tweets and social media posts. What should not change is our enduring goal. Our responsibility, our mission, if you will, is to serve as trusted, trustworthy protectors of evidence. We safeguard records, data, and information as proof to support and strengthen accountability, uphold rights and responsibilities, nurture and encourage personal and community identity, and develop and enrich individual and collective memory. If archives are to serve as verifiable sources of proof, then they need to be authentic. Authenticity depends on trust. Do we trust the records? Do we trust the data? Do we trust the people, processes, or machines that create, capture, and make available that source of proof? In the old days of linear analog archival work, vaults and locks and keys were a guarantee of protection, but archivists could only provide that layer of protection once the materials were in our care. Rarely did we get the chance to influence best practice in record making. More often, we received materials when they were surplus to requirements, and we were faced with the task of making sense of boxes and boxes of documentation which had to be interpreted according to some organizing principle. Among the criteria we used to establish that organizing principle were the concepts of provenance and original order. As I argued in my 2002 article, The Death of the Fond and the Resurrection of Provenance, provenance was a tricky concept a century ago, made even more problematic by the adoption of the concept of the fond. Provenance, original order, and the idea of a unified fond are even more challenging concepts today. Let us first address and set aside the concept of the archival fond. The fond has been interpreted to mean a complete, comprehensive totality of archival materials. This idea has been misapplied so badly in some quarters as to become almost meaningless. 2 items created by an artist and housed in one museum are her fond. Another 50 boxes of archives by the same artist in another institution are also her fond. Illogical. We have boxed ourselves into such a corner with this misuse of terms. Let's not dwell on it here. Let us turn instead to the more useful but still problematic concept of provenance. Archivists have, I believe, adopted an imprecise interpretation of provenance, pulling aspects of the definition from a variety of allied specialties. In archaeology, the term provenience refers to the archaeological record of an object. Where was the item found physically? How does that item relate to objects found above or below or beside it? What was, in archaeological terms, its find spot? In the art world, provenance refers to the chronological history of a work of art, starting with its creation and then following the chain of possession. Artistic provenance is the physical, legal, and intellectual story of the object over time. Archivists have come up with a different definition of provenance, which refers to the origin or source of a body of archives. Who made the records in the first place? The concept of provenance is accompanied by the notion of original order. How were the archives created and managed? Original order is often derived from the appearance of the records when they arrive in archival custody, which I suggest leaves us with a narrow and flawed understanding of the evidence. Provenance, original order, and the idea of a fond imply that archivists receive and care for a whole body of archives. We do not. We care for the remains, for what is left behind. A sliver of a sliver, as the South African archivist Vern Harris has argued. I have argued we should focus more on custodial history, the story of archives over time, which is akin to the artistic interpretation of provenance. The central question is not, how did these archives come to be, but how did these archives come to be here? To confirm the authenticity of documentary evidence, we need to understand its progression from creation to custodial care. Documenting this progression is especially important in a digital age, when the time between creation and loss can be mere seconds. There may be no custodial care and therefore no guarantee of preservation. Authenticity and evidence have become critically important in the world today, with wars and pandemics and government coups. The news is filled with stories of mis- and disinformation, of the manipulation of data and evidence, and of the destruction of records and archives, often for nefarious purposes. If the job of the archivist is to protect the authenticity of evidence as a counter to lies and deceit, then we cannot wait to receive a box of old archives, whether physical or digital, and hope the materials were not manipulated somewhere along the way. We must participate in their care from the point of creation, if not before. In the urgency of the digital world, our focus on provenance, original order, and the fond is giving way to a different approach on validating authenticity. If we are going to trust evidence, archivists need to play a role in establishing trustworthy mechanisms for creating, capturing, and protecting information so that it can stand as authentic proof. This is not new. This is, in fact, a return to the old, to the days of authentication through seals and sealing wax. Only now our focus is on capturing metadata, assigning digital properties, embedding watermarks, and designing digital tracking tools. Provenance is still important, but archivists cannot focus on matters of custodial care if we cannot guarantee authenticity. Many specialists are deeply engaged in the work of guaranteeing authenticity. Computer programmers and information specialists are building metadata standards, establishing protocols for the use of blockchain technologies, and establishing mechanisms for maintaining trustworthy digital repositories. Archivists are in the mix, certainly, but I think we still spend too much time talking to ourselves. We will not succeed if we work alone. We are too niche a field. Our work is critically important, but seen by too many as devoted to the old, the static, the custodial. We need to collaborate with experts outside of our field. Our contribution to the work of authenticity comes from our long view of the value of evidence to society. To help drive change, I urge archivists to work with our colleagues to build teams that help us focus on 4 core priorities for the protection of evidence: regulation, technology, public awareness, and professional ethics. Archivists need to participate actively and vigorously to strengthen the legislation, regulations, and policies that impact evidence. The European Union's General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR, is a valuable tool, but GDPR and similar legislative mechanisms need to include formal recognition of the enduring value of evidence. It's not just data, it's not just information. It can stand as proof. Sebastian van der Laars, founder and CEO of the Trusted Web Foundation, has argued for strengthening data and information legislation to support integrity and authenticity. As he said, consumers should demand transparency and accountability. If information impacts your life, as a citizen you deserve the freedom to verify how information changed over time and who the sender is. As van der Laars argues, integrity must be a precondition, not an afterthought. Archivists also need to insert our expertise into the development of technologies for making and keeping information and records. We cannot wait to acquire archives so that we can examine their provenance and determine if they are authentic. We can and should continue to contribute to the development of tools to capture and preserve authentic digital signatures, to blockchain or similar technologies for record keeping, and to code software and firmware to authenticate sources of information. As Andy Parsons, Senior Director of Content Authenticity Initiative at the computer software company Adobe, has explained, the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity, or C2PA, is developing technical standards for certifying the source and history of media content. Rather than focus on the hit and miss capture of metadata by humans, which requires the creator or holder of information to remember to add contextual data, and to do so consistently, Adobe is developing content authenticity tools that sit within hardware and software. For example, coding is being built into the software that operates digital cameras so that GPS, tracking, and descriptive data are captured the moment an image is created. The software then ensures this metadata persists when the images are exported into other repositories, from digital storage systems to news feeds. Archivists have always cared about authenticity. We have a role to play in ensuring authenticity is guaranteed from the beginning. Archivists also need to be advocates. The more we engage with the public about the value of archives, the more we gain their support. We need to change how we communicate. If we focus on the past, on the old, people will not understand their role in the digital archives of today. Let us emphasize evidence and authenticity. Let us explain how documentary evidence serves as an antidote to fake news. Let us speak not just of research and scholarship, but of risks and rewards. Let us talk about rights, responsibilities, identity, and memory. This shift in language does not change who we are, but as the materials we work with change and our processes change, our relationship with the public also needs to change. Finally, We need to address the question I raised earlier. What is our role as neutral custodians? The archivist was never neutral, any more than a judge or doctor or journalist is neutral. I don't have a problem with that fact. We all have our biases and perspectives. I do have a problem with privileging our personal biases over our role as trustworthy protectors of evidence. We expect judges and doctors and journalists to set aside their personal opinions to the best of their ability in the service of society. We should expect the same of ourselves. We can and should understand and acknowledge our perspectives, but we should not tip the scale and say that because everyone is biased, it is okay to allow our own biases to overshadow our duty. To maintain this balance, I believe the most valuable action we can take in the short term is to update our professional codes of ethics. We need to address issues of bias, but we also need to redefine our core functions so they reflect the reality of the digital age. The International Council on Archives Code of Ethics, passed in 1996, states that the primary duty of archivists is to maintain the integrity of the records in their care and custody. It is not enough, though, to maintain the integrity of records once they arrive in custodial care if we cannot ensure their integrity before they come into our care. Maintaining the integrity of digital records requires direct intervention in the process of creation. Traditional codes of ethics do not speak of the archivist as records manager or information policy analyst. Does the role of the archivist need to be redefined? Maybe, but I believe we can articulate our duties and priorities today without assigning labels that lock us down. Of course, archives are not just about risk and bureaucracy. Archives are about stories, memories, and connections. We need the public to understand the value of all types of documentary evidence, digital and analog, public and private, creative and corporate. The archives of art and artists, like the archives of others in society, help us to understand not only the work of those creators, but also the nature of society itself. The role of the archivist is to help preserve and protect, and then make available trustworthy evidence for everyone to use in whatever way they wish in the service of truth. From facts and evidence comes truth. Evidence-based truth, of course, but also a more nuanced, thoughtful, and complex personal truth. The more we know, the more we can think and learn and imagine. To end where I began, let me again quote Picasso, who said, "If there were only one truth, you couldn't paint 100 canvases on the same theme." Archives are sources of fact and proof, which help uphold evidence-based truth. Art is a world of imagination and emotion, which challenges the idea that there is one truth. My goal as an archivist is to ensure that artifice, if artifice exists, is used in the service of art, not archives. Thank you for letting me join you.